So, good morning, and thank you for joining us this morning. They say best ideas come out of smaller groups, so that's definitely a good start for us. First of all, we have to recognize how great it is that the Belgrade Security Forum is going green, as we can see from the visuals and also from the content of this year's forum, including our session. And second, I want to let you know that this panel is co-organized by the Belgrade Security Forum team and the Women's Platform for the Development of Serbia. And I have to admit that it is our intent to use this session as an advocacy and influencing platform for a particular vision of development. We may want to unpack questions of purpose behind economic value creation, use of resources, ways in which value is redistributed in our societies, and how economic activity is framed. We want to spot any underutilized opportunities and to identify limitations in the light of how development outcomes impact quality of daily lives of women and men, girls and boys in our societies. And just briefly, the Women's Platform for the Development of Serbia is an informal network of 500 plus signatories who come from all the different sectors. They're entrepreneurs, activists of the women's movement, politicians, members of parliament, journalists, academics, and experts. And we're gathered around the shared vision of inclusive development and focused on quality of daily lives. We believe that collaboration is the key missing ingredient in the Western Balkans and a precondition of inclusive growth that we stand for. We also argue that economies are only as successful as they're able to address diverse needs of women and men and boys and girls while being mindful of the ecosystem. So meeting the needs of all within the means of the planet is really a platform for our action, with a much stronger emphasis on research and development, innovation, human capital development, and accountability to current and future generations. It's kind of sustainable development goals meet Kate Raworth, who is the author of Donut Economics, a very interesting book. If you haven't read it, we recommend it. And in the spirit of co-thinking and co-creation, we have here an amazing panel, and they can tell us, based on their own very different and very specific and unique experiences and their specific angle, what it is that we need to do in the Western Balkans countries in order to enhance quality and intensity of our development accomplishments. Can we possibly leapfrog and move away from the damage build-up model that promotes zero-sum game approaches at the detriment to the environment and citizens' quality of life? So I just want to take a moment to present and introduce our panel, although you may be familiar with them already. They certainly deserve it. On my right-hand side is Ms. Sirena Vojačkova-Solorano. She's UN Development Coordinator, Office Regional Director ad interim for Europe and Central Asia, based in Istanbul, Turkey. Before that, she was UN Resident Coordinator and UNDP Resident Representative to the Republic of Turkey, and prior to that to Serbia. She also served for almost 3 decades for the International Organization for Migration, where she basically was the director of one thing or another, including Migration Management Department, Regional Director for Southeast Asia, and Regional Director for Central Europe, based in Vienna. In terms of education, Ms. Vojačkova holds a diploma from the Asian Institute of Management, Diplomatic Academy in Vienna, a master's in history, geography, and international law, and a bachelor in history and political sciences. So a very broad spectrum of experiences and education. Next to her is Dr. Melinda Brego, Secretary General, Regional Cooperation Council, based in Sarajevo, whom I first met 2 years ago in Tirana, Albania, on a European movement-organized trip of regional collaboration. And there were different diplomats, entrepreneurs, journalists, experts, and politicians who met with their peers in Albania, and it was wonderful and truly obvious how much we need cooperation in this part of the world. And Dr. Mailinda Brego knows about it. She's a very experienced collaborator, both as politician and also as scientist, lecturer, TV anchor. She graduated from the Faculty of Social Sciences, got a master's degree in social and political science and a PhD in sociology from University of Urbino in Italy. She worked as anchor for the Albanian television and served as national coordinator of the First Gender Institute in Albania. She served 3 terms as the Member of Parliament in the Democratic Party. It's a center-right party. She was elected president of the Albanian parliamentary delegation and was the chair of the subcommittee on gender equality and minors, served as Minister of European Integration, and has extensive experience in collaboration with politicians, public institutions, and civil society organizations. I have to stop somewhere. There is more. There's so many things I couldn't resist. Next to her is Ms. Blair Tarcella. She's Deputy Regional Director for UN Women Europe and Central Asia Regional Office. And maybe you don't know, but UN Women is a really young agency of the United Nations. And over only 10 years, it has become tremendously influential and constructive member of society. And really, it feels like they've been around forever without the baggage of bureaucratic approaches. They're very creative and very, very supportive of local women's movements, which was the missing link, maybe. As for Ms. Cella, she has 20 years of experience in program management, design, and implementation. She served as UNDP Deputy Resident Representative in another interesting country, Ukraine. And before that, she served as Head of Partnerships, Results, and Resources Management with UNDP in Bangladesh and Development Policy Bureau with UNDP New York. She was also with the Gender Team and the HIV/AIDS Group. So also very useful and diverse experiences, especially in inclusion of those who are sometimes left behind. She has experiences with CSOs and with human rights work. Our token male, Mr. Julian Popov, is fellow European Climate Foundations in Brussels, chairman of the Buildings Performance Institute in Europe, and a Goodwill Ambassador for Energy and Climate Policies of Bulgaria. He also leads the Southeast Europe Initiative for High-Level Energy Policy Cooperation. He used to serve as Minister of Environment of Bulgaria and Energy Security Advisor to the Bulgarian President. He's the founding CEO and current board member of the New Bulgarian University. Previously, he served on board of the Bulgarian School of Politics and is the co-founder of the Tunisian School of Politics. He has been voted twice, listen to this, as one of the 40 most influential voices in European energy policy, and he authored several books. English Bulgaria or Switzerland in the Balkans is the title of one of them. The Island of Mists is another, and he authored the European Super Grid. So many things to listen to from Europe's most influential voice. I promoted you to the most influential, not one off, for the purpose of the panel. Dr. Vlatka Matkovic is Senior Health and Energy Officer at Health and Environment Alliance in Brussels. Her PhD is in biomedicine and health sciences from the University of Zagreb. She leads the work on implementation of health and environment rule for coal plants in the EU and the Balkans. She coordinates health professional-led campaign on clear air. It's called Unmask My City. And it's a global initiative by doctors, nurses, public health practitioners, and allied healthcare professionals dedicated to improving the quality and reducing emissions in our cities. And Dr. Matkovic is particularly interested in building health allies and engaging medical professionals in wider health, climate, and energy debate, very relevant to the Western Balkans. As we heard yesterday, we tend to be one of the biggest polluters in Europe. Dr. Matkovic is also the author of numerous publications and various scientific articles. And now that we know we have a highly competent, diverse, and amazingly insightful panel, we want to ask you to choose from the set of 4 questions and take a couple of minutes to respond just to get us started. So the first question is a more optimistic, greener, more meaningful, human and natural resources friendly future needed and possible in the Western Balkans? The second question is, are there certain symmetries that we need to avoid or emphasize? Like yesterday, in the MENA session, we heard from Hilary Kalmbach that authoritarianism and patriarchy are closely related. How important do you think is democracy to green development? Is there a connection? The third question is, do we even have a development vision in the Western Balkan societies, or do we simply have an EU accession framework? Could it be that we've got it wrong and that we undervalue the economic and social worth of community, of a sense of belonging, of being included, respected, and valued, while we focused on formal changes in legislation, for example, and forgot real lives of real people? And the final set of questions is, can we reassure Western Balkan citizens that there are enough resources to go around and that it is not, in fact, a zero-sum game where emphasis is on competition, but rather that it could be a game of co-creation, collaboration, innovation, and reinterpretation? Is it time to look away from GDP as the only measure of success? So, should we go in the order you're seated and start with Mr. Voiatko?
Thank you so much, and good morning. Your introduction made me feel very old, so I think at the next panel I have to tell them to make it short, because otherwise one feels very old. But no, thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here. As you have heard, I have served in Serbia for a few years, so I'm a little bit familiar with issues that are happening in this region. You have given us a selection of questions to answer, and I would pick the one about undervaluing local communities, because I think this is the one that summarizes it all. Because it is the local communities that make things happen or don't make things happen. And if they are abused, they don't make things happen. But if they are encouraged and used, then they will make things happen. So I think that working with local communities is the most important part that needs to be done all over the world, but especially in this region. Because as bigger you go in the discussion in society, especially in this region, as more cooks you have who want to put more spice into the soup. If you stay local, it's not worth it to put spice in the soup. So I think it's the local communities, it is working with communities that can really create a positive vibe. It is the young people in the small local communities that can bring new energy to the region. But what is happening, they are leaving. But why are they leaving? Because we don't give them the sense of community. We don't give them a sense of community that takes care of them, but also that gives them the opportunity to thrive, the opportunity to develop, the opportunity to use their whatever crazy ideas they have. But this is the future. So I think it is supporting local communities, getting local communities working together in the region. And the different parts of the United Nations have had in the past many projects that were trying to put local communities across borders together. and especially focusing on young people. It is not about the big money. It is about putting a little bit money, a little seed into communities to make them, to pay the bus ticket, to visit from the south to the north and from the east to the west. And it can do wonders that last forever. So I think we need to focus on that. Talking about green economy, for us the big item is climate change. All countries in the region have subscribed to the Paris Accord, but it has stayed on that level. Did anybody in smaller municipalities ever hear about that? Did they ever hear what that actually means for them? Because it is actually designed for them to change things. And the funding that is coming is actually for the communities to change. Did it reach them? I don't have the statistics, but I have my doubts. So this is where all of us, we need to educate. We need to educate local communities about the power that they have and not leave them to the devices of few politicians who have only their own political interest. And as the UN, as civil society, this is the responsibility that we have. When I was reflecting about coming to this panel, and I was then thinking my experience with the region, and wherever I worked around the world. So I come from Europe. Wherever I was, I met people from the Western Balkans, no matter which country I worked in. I am now based in Turkey. Wherever I go, I meet people who come from the Western Balkans. And on both sides of the spectrum, if you go east, if you go west, it's always successful people. It's always successful people even in business or in civil society or in arts. They are always successful. Can you imagine if all of them would be here? That would be just a firework of things happening. So we need to give these people an environment where they feel that they can be at home and that they are respected for what they are. And that is about the small community. Because even in Belgrade, if you are sitting in Vračar or in Novi Beograd, it is a community. And you need to give this community a sense of thriving. So I think this would be my contribution to this and the answer to the question. It is our responsibility as the UN and as the civil society to focus on communities. It is the Paris Accord when we look at climate change, but you have mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals. It's the SDGs that just said it all. You take the Sustainable Development Goals, you go into a classroom of 10, 12-year-olds, and you let them work on it for 2 hours. You will see wonders what they come up with, and we have to listen to them.
Thank you so much for highlighting the importance of community. Ms. Brego, the floor is yours then.
Good morning. I don't think I need to push any button.
No, that's
okay.
Okay,
So it's automatic. Okay, good morning, and thank you again, dear Sonia, for inviting. Yeah, actually, I was trying all this time to identify which panel might have been mostly appropriate for me, but this panel as well, for two reasons, is the one that I'm participating in first, because I couldn't move earlier to follow the whole Belgrade Security Forum from office, and secondly, and this I'll come back to your question, because the Regional Cooperation Council, the main priority is to bring the economies of the region closer to the EU. And there is a very good reason for that as well, and I think that will immediately reply to your question. Does the region has a development vision, or we do things because those are part of the enlargement policy and the EU integration project. Well, being awake up to 3 a.m. last night to follow the decision on non-decision on the opening of accession talks on Albania and North Macedonia, which actually the meeting has to restart the summit in half an hour at 10 o'clock. I'm thinking that the development vision on green in the region plus the enlargement agenda are both not based on sustainable principles. And I don't feel proud to say that, but I'm not as young as you heard as to be quite naive and fool myself for the rest of my years. Yes, they are always deeply interconnected, and Tanya might go in details to explain you why the chapter 27 is such an important one. And now that the EU is discussing on the new approach for the enlargement of the Western Balkans, and maybe the new methodology will be open for more discussions up to the moment that will be approved, I'm thinking why we don't add a new element in that new approach. Let's have the chapter 27 as well be open first, as it is the chapter on the rule of law. Because all the world now is speaking, talking, and focused on green economy and environment. And that is not because and by chance, and I don't think that it's only a political move, that this is going to be the priority agenda for the very first 100 days of the new European Commission. It makes a sense because alarming figures are coming everywhere from the world. Last day we had our board meeting at the RCC, and actually we changed our folders and our banners because, as you all know, this is the Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And the breast cancer, or the cancer and the tumors in the region, are one of those health issues that are heavily happening because of the air pollution. The region, 20 cities so the 6 Western Balkans economies are part, and the capitals, but not only, are among the 20 cities with the highest air pollution in the world. So you could imagine how deep the climate issues and the environmental issues should be, and how close to our heart and to the development policies those should be. But on the latest edition that we had this year, actually, on the Balkan Barometer, a majority of people in the region, 84%, they perceive the climate change as a problem. So they are hearing a lot about climate change in media, news, meeting of leaders everywhere. But while 80% think that climate change is a big problem, 60% do not care about air pollution. Okay, so everybody knows that Balkans are a set of paradoxes, so you have to interpret different data. So why people should be 84% worried on climate change and 60% not worried on the air pollution? But that's even because of the lack of communication, or not a proper communication in the region. While, again, as I said, 26% of all the mostly non-communicable diseases in the region are caused by air pollution. So it is, the figures are quite alarming. But on the other hand, you have some good businessmen and business community that at least for them 59%, they think that they are ready to invest more in environmentally friendly equipments. And that's the picture from the region. But again, I think that in none of the economies of the region, apart that the budgetary lines, when those are approved in parliament, you'll always hear higher figures in terms of GDP. On environment, none of the economies of the region is really considering environment as a priority. And that is a problem that is present everywhere. So, as I said previously, I guess that now environment should be considered fundamentals first, as it is, rule of law. we were just before and prior to this panel discussing on how much it is not even economic friendly what the region is spending on the coal heating system. And we are subsidizing more than 180 million per year, almost every economy in the region, the coal heating system, which means that in a near future or in a longer run, when we'll be closer to EU, all this investment and all this coal-fired industrial fabrics, whatever in the country is present in the region will be bankrupted. So nothing will work out anymore. And then again, we have to pay, even that was estimated, 1 billion euros, because we need to meet the standards. Given that the situation is not as green as one would like to see, I think that now, as not all bad comes for bad, it might be a very good moment with this new idea, new approach on enlargement, for all the leaders of the economies of this region to come together and pressure positively together on more structural funds right now. And those investments and funds to be devoted on health issues, environmental issues, and on the real development and changing the standards in the region. Otherwise, I'm afraid that we'll be dragging ourselves and our can down the road on discussing only big politics, elite ideas, while people, as Irena said, will continue to leave from the region. And on 2019, the number or the figure on the brain drain out of the Western Balkans was 9% higher than the previous year. So year by year, almost 9% of the young people from the region have decided to leave. And I'm afraid that up to the moment when the enlargement of the EU will be completed then with Western Balkans, the ones remaining here in this area will really not care about environment anymore. Either they will be elderly people or then people that are going to have human and basic needs. And it's going to be, again, quite difficult for them to think on environment and different policies. So to close it up, this is not a call at an early stage, and I know it, but we are really at dead earnest to consider the environment agenda in the region a priority. And I'll stop here.
Thank you so much for shedding light on how things are and giving some ideas about possible ways forward. And we are going to talk about that future, and what it is we can do in the second round also. And now we turn to Ms. Cella, who will also, if you will accept on your plate another question, which is next year the world celebrates important milestones. One is really the 25th anniversary of the Women's Platform for the Development, sorry, not Women's Platform, the Beijing Platform and Declaration, Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, got it right now. And it is an important festivity of global agreement, and sometimes we just discount it easily. Okay, one of those things that were signed and agreed to, but it's really a major event. And women's groups from around the globe are working hard as we speak to come to an agreement where to press harder, because some things were done, but other things were not. And sub-regional consultations were held, and regional consultations will be held soon in Geneva. So if you can also shed the light of the importance of equality, gender equality in this scenario, and does that offer any hope for the future?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you on an issue that is very close to my heart. I left the Balkans when I was 17, mainly because I felt hopeless about the region, to be honest. But then I returned back, and then I'm really excited that I get the opportunity to work on issues and so my vision is a bit more optimistic, actually. I think that there is hope on a lot of these issues, and I would like to emphasize that if we want to have a real development vision for the Balkans, we have to ensure that we leverage, we include, we capitalize on half of the population, women. And I do think that women are the solution, actually, not only in the Balkans, but globally, to many of the development challenges that we're facing. And I think, and this is a fact, that economic development, prosperity, green would not happen without ensuring that women are fully economically empowered, participate fully in the economic progress of the countries, but also maximize their full potential. And we have this. We have global evidence that shows very clearly from McKinsey and others that if you invest in women, you're going to get $12 trillion in economic growth around the world. However, we see, and one of the issues that has been emphasized by the women's groups as part of the Beijing is we see that the economic activities for women remains very low. The economic empowerment remains still very, very far, and there is so much more that we need to do. Women remain unbanked, they lack financial inclusion, assets, economic opportunities. The gender pay gap remains, it will take 202 years for it to become a reality, based on the trends and the steps that we're going. And we have also a research from the Balkans that unemployment in the formal sector remains very low. And imagine where we know that women are primarily working in the informal sector. As a matter of fact, I was looking at some of the data just for unemployment from 2018, 39% for men in Kosovo versus 11% for women. 25% of women versus 44% men. 36 versus 54 in North Macedonia. 41 versus 56 in Montenegro. 41 versus 56 in Serbia. 45 versus 59 in Albania. And so you see that in all of the countries you have much less women in informal employment. Secondly, as part of the vision, in terms of how do we ensure that, and what do we need to emphasize, that women do not only participate in the economic sector, but it is also critical that we capitalize on the key opportunities. We already are in the era of the fourth industrial revolution. We're in a different world. There is so much technology. And so how do we ensure that women do benefit from this new technology and the new opportunities that the fourth industrial revolution exposes us? Are we building financial literacy for women to access the digital means and the digital employment opportunities? And we have great practices around the world that when you do this, you empower women in all spheres of society. So this is an area that we need to do more, and also we see a huge gender divide in terms of the digital divide. We have figures from the ITU where women have less access to internet, in particular women in the rural areas, and this is something that we really need to do to emphasize more. Third, an area that has been emphasized, especially as part of how do we build a more prosperous Balkans, is that we need to work with key actors, and private sector is one of the key actors that we need to do more. And again, I would like to cite global research from 500 Fortune that shows that smart companies are realizing that having more women in the boards, in decision-making roles in these companies are yielding quite a lot more profit. And this is clear evidence and research from the 500, from Catalyst, the Fortune 500. So this is a fact, and yet the reality is that this is not happening. And women on a day-to-day basis in the public and the private sphere continue to face discrimination in employment, continue to face discrimination in recruitment, in retention, in promotion practices. And I was in Brussels yesterday, and I was listening carefully in research from EU and others that shows very clearly the gender-based discrimination in the Balkans, where 78% of women, 77% of women in Montenegro, 84 in Serbia, in North Macedonia, 78 in Albania. And yet, despite of all of these women facing direct discrimination, the majority of them, over 70% of them, do not report it. And a quote from a 29-year-old woman from Serbia: "I'm certain that none of the institutions will respond to my complaint, and I have no trust in them. Therefore, I will not report it." So how can we talk about, again, all of these issues when women are afraid and have zero trust in the systems in terms of reporting this discrimination? And finally, I would like to also, since we're talking about a greener Balkans, I would like to emphasize the fact that in many countries around the world, women are still disproportionately shouldering the effects of the climate change, and yet often they are at the front lines as agent for change when it comes to addressing the climate change and the climate vulnerabilities. We do not have, unfortunately, much research yet in the Balkans. We need to do a lot more sex and gender disaggregated data and statistics to see the direct impacts, but we do know that we do know from a lot of anecdotal evidence, and some of the existing research, the direct effect that they are suffering, especially women in the rural areas, who are often left to deal with the vulnerabilities, including from drought, disasters, but also a recent research that we did with SU Newman in Serbia on simply waste management, on recycling practices. We saw that women are often the ones that are in charge or doing most of this recycling practices at their homes, because a lot of the waste management issues is coming from food and food waste. And we have other research that shows that 70% of women are in charge in the households. Of course, I challenge the fact why they are doing that, but the reality is that it is a reality in our countries that, and they are a lot more, also the research shows that they're a lot more prone to changing recycling practices to ensure environmental sustainable practices. So how do we leverage women's roles, and how do we leverage these opportunities? How do we ensure that we support these women to pursue environmental sustainable practices? I'll stop here. I will give more about some of the things that we need to be doing and we as an organization do. But basically my simple answer is that there will be no green, there will be no prosperous or developed Western Balkans if you do not ensure that half of the populations, not only are they fully included and benefit from it, but that they're real leveraged as key actors for change in this vision. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cella. We are threading our thread slowly, and in fact, this year's economic award, Nobel Prize Award, was given to people who demonstrated that really there is a link between development, fight against poverty in micro situations and ability to resolve small, very specific issues, as opposed to only focusing on macro level issues. That was the dominant focus before. And we see there is a very direct link between, vaccination, gender equality, environment protection, and well-being. And it is a reminder that we may have forgotten about these things. Thank you all for reminding us of this. What is the regional outlook from your shoes, Mr. Popov?
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me to this panel. I probably would claim, not my energy credentials, but probably I'm the strongest feminist in this panel. And I can prove it with my writings in the past. But, probably that comes from my mother and my two grandmothers, who managed not just to keep our family together through very difficult times, but also to lead them. So, what is the outlook? I will pick some of the questions that also you mentioned at the very beginning about the relationship between the Western Balkans and the EU, the accession process and the GDP. I think the outlook is positive, but we are moving very slowly. And at the moment, one thing that is happening is we can't afford to move slowly. We have to move very fast. It's not just the realization that the climate crisis is becoming more critical, but everything is moving very, very fast. Technology is accelerating everything. Probably that's the reason why now the European Union is discussing, and I believe that will happen, to set up 55% CO2 emission reduction by 2030 compared to 1990 level. So that's a very interesting story. It's more interesting to look not at the 55% number, but if we look at the negotiations 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 2014, and I was somehow part of that, there was a huge row and clash at the top prime ministerial level and in Brussels, whether the goal for carbon reduction in 2030 should be 27% or at least 27%. And when finally the decision was to be at least 27%, I promise you, I saw two people crying for this victory, climate activists, saying, wow, we managed at least 27%. 5 years later, it's 55%. The difference between 27% and 55%, and I'll try now to translate that in kind of some normal words, is monumental. That means that we're not talking about solar panels and energy efficiency, we're talking about deep transformation of our economies. And this is possible not because of the protests of Greta Thunberg or because of new research. This is possible because of the very, very low cost now of renewables, because of the learning curve that we traveled through, and we can see now that these objectives for very, very ambitious climate goals is actually economically beneficial. And not just economically beneficial in this long-term sense. We have to reduce the climate risk in 2050 or at the end of the century. It's immediately economic beneficial. At the moment, if you build a new coal power plant, you can't produce coal for less in the European Union and very soon in the Western Balkans. You can't produce coal for less than 80, 90, 100 euro per megawatt hour. If you build a solar power plant and take out corruption, unnecessary subsidies and so on, that number will be 30 euros. So sort of 3 times lower. At the moment, the Bulgarian government, the Romanian government, and all sorts of other governments want very much to build nuclear power plants. I personally don't have a problem with nuclear technology, but I can say that nuclear technology would be 3-4 times more expensive than renewable energy. So these are economic realities that are pushing very hard in the direction of ambitious climate goals. And we're very lucky. And here, I think, there is a very interesting role of the Western Balkans. The Western Balkans and the Balkans in general is probably the region in Europe which is blessed with the best cost-competitive renewable potential in the whole of Europe. So that's hydro, solar, wind, biomass, geothermal. The only renewable energy that is not here is tidal energy. And anyway, that's not developed enough. So the Western Balkans have a very, very strong negotiation kind of point with the European Union in saying, look, if you're serious about climate, you have to take us on board. Because we can either sit with our lignite plants, produce a lot of carbon emission, poison ourselves, get poorer and poorer and create all sorts of problems. And in the Balkans, we know how to create problems. We're very good at that. Or we can become a major component in the transition of Europe. And this is one thing, for instance, that one can say to Mr. Macron. Say, look, I mean, you're not serious with your kind of hesitations about the integration of the Western Balkans. The Western Balkans must be very, very strong part of this agenda. And this is not just because the Western Balkans, we're nice people and please help us. No, it's the other way around. We can help you. And we finish with one sentence about the gender side of all this. I mean, the conventional energy is very kind of masculine. I mean, men like to, I don't know, dig holes and put big pipelines. And digging holes and pipelines are irrelevant anymore for the energy sector. So I would very strongly support a more profound engagement of women in all kind of roles in the energy sector, not simply because of gender equality, but because of economic reasons, security reasons, and also the European integrity reasons. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Popov, and not only for that insight about digging holes and putting pipelines.
Bad somehow.
We now go to our last speaker, Dr. Matkovic, who comes from the future because the academic field, her own academic field, is really moving very fast, biomedicine. But also, we have another question for you, if you will accept. And you have some success in mobilizing citizens. That's very important, you know, getting the buy-in for change. Are we, as citizens, demanding too little or too much from our states?
Okay, thank you for the question. And when I was invited to the panel, the title is Image of the Future. And I was thinking, okay, let's imagine this future. So what can we imagine here? Like, first one that comes to my mind, and I come from health sector, is well-being and health of our population. This is like baseline of every image of the future we want to achieve. And one component of this is, of course, healthy environment as well as healthy systems in terms of energy systems, in terms of educational systems, in terms of social security systems, and so on. So with this point of view, I was coming to this panel. My organization is working on environmental health in Europe, covering a lot Balkans as well. We look at the Balkans as a Europe. We are, in fact, covering whole of the European region, as WHO or World Health Organization is. So we do not separate this region by political current situation, because this is impossible in many ways. For example, one way is air pollution. Air pollution does not stop borders. So if we have 16 coal plants, whole of the Balkan fleet, coal fleet in the region, producing the same amount of 250 coal fleet of European Union, this cannot stay, this pollution cannot simply stay in the region. It must travel somewhere. And it is traveling, as of course, in Europe and other countries in the world, damaging health, not just in Balkans, in Europe, and so on. So we have to have a broader picture than just Balkans or just Europeans. We have to take into account everything. Just to give you one more bad news, let's sort of say. For example, in Serbia, Kostolac, so one plant is emitting the same amount of pollution as whole of the German fleet. This is tremendous, like tremendous. Of course, if you travel then to Balkans and you stay in, let's say, in Belgrade, like we are here now, it's sunny, it's not winter, people are not heating their homes with wood or coal, and still you have much above any legal limits air pollution currently in Belgrade now. So go outside and probably you will breathe it and you will feel it. This is where I come from, and trying to reduce air pollution. We have mechanisms to do so. Balkans is part of different international treaties. One of them is Energy Community Treaty that already has some legislation in place, and I think not to just throw stones on political systems in Balkans. They did quite a good job in transposing legislation from Europe and all the things that are going on internationally, but where we come maybe less ambitious about is implementation. So we have some of the legislation in place and we are doing absolutely nothing about this. So when are we going to start doing something about this? When are we going to start to either, for example, installing filters if it's about coal plants? When are we going to shut coal plants and install some other capacities that will then benefit region in another way? Through my organization, we started the global campaign on clean air. Obviously, clean air is very connected to, or bad air is connected to bad health as well. And we launched a campaign on clean air in several cities around Europe. One of them is very close by Bulgaria, in Sofia, where we got really big support from health community, who is very vocal about all the action plans around clean air. And things, I think, over there, at least in this part of Balkans, are moving to some extent. We are, of course, looking forward to see some concrete measures and some concrete things in place, but at least the awareness is much greater than just neighboring country Serbia, where doctors in Serbia already in 2015 launched a statement and a call for political call for closing and shutting down coal power plants in Serbia, but nobody is taking any note of this. So yeah, we have similar situations and then completely different pictures. And with this, I would like to close my points.
Thank you so much. We have heard so many things from our panelists already, and we're going to turn to the audience now and gather your questions. Let me just try to summarize quickly main points. We emphasize the importance of communities because that's where all the implementation really occurs, regardless of what we have signed into formally. We have also some very serious concerns regarding energy and environmental protection in the Balkans. We have signed into treaties that we do not always necessarily respect. There is some progress, especially in the newer members of the European Union, where we see that behaviors can change and awareness levels can be increased. However, there is cause for concern. The changes are not rapid enough, and we need to somehow find ways to speed up. Perhaps one of the ways is focusing on gender equality and on what women can contribute. which has been costed out in the European Union as a huge potential contributor to GDP and to development. We have to include citizens, we have to get the buy-in, the professionals are already on board, but these issues are seriously eroding our quality of life. So in which order, what do you think? The floor is yours now. Please state your name, where you come from, and which panelist you're addressing the question to. Ms. Sonja Licht.
Well, first of all, thank
We
you
have
very much.
just the mic.
Thank you very much for this really inspiring panel that also kind of listed many, many issues that we are facing. The good news is that we are not the only ones. The bad news is that we are too slow to really start in a serious way solving the issues. I mean, I'm so inclined to talk about coal, but I won't. I know that that is also very much connected to the rule of law, because I would really like in Serbia to see who is giving that power to the coal lobby. I stop there, since I said I won't.
Please
but,
don't stop.
But what really inspires me the most is the fact that there is so much more understanding of the role of the communities, of the local governments, the closest to the people, to work with the people, for the people. This is being lost when we go up in the hierarchy. However, and it is really, I mean, my own Belgrade Fund for Political Excellence is now very involved in trying to bring the bottom-up development approach on the agenda. Neither of our countries have a development vision. Neither has a real development strategy. And so we decided to start from bottom up, maybe to push and pull in a different direction. However, we won't succeed if there is not enough support from those who are really listened to. One example, the annual report of the European Commission, and I'm happy Tanya is here with us at this point especially, is really listened to much more seriously than before, because it is becoming tougher, more detailed, etc. Of course, if they say there is no enlargement for us, this is going to change. But let's hope that this won't be an immediate result of this meeting today. In that annual report, you have a lot of wonderful points this year, very important, very strong. Decentralization is not mentioned. How can you make these countries really democratic, to start from the other angle, if you don't decentralize? So my question to the panel is, how to mobilize allies in this approach? How to really reach slowly, I know it's step by step, of that urge to invite the headliners to talk about things, and not also to invite those who are living those things in a genuine way. And I would like also to ask anyone who would like to address. Last year we had an excellent panel on Fourth Industrial Revolution. How can we really use, again, this need to move further and especially engage women and young people, because for me, with due respect to Julian, but I know he accepts it fully, these are the only real agents of change, at least in our region.
Thank you very much for the question. Would any panel member would like to get us started on the answer? Please.
Well, maybe might not be appropriate answer, but Sonia is always successful in awaking you. So I was thinking now, while you mentioned decentralization, and then goes in line with the idea that we were trying to develop and introduce on the new strategy working plan of RCC, but as well it has to be part of the new strategy of Southeast 2030 that should go in line with the EU strategy. And coming to our, let's say, obligation as the Regional Cooperation Council, we've been thinking in-house and proposed that one of the pillars to be part of the regional economic area, and we are hearing more and more every day, should be the local bodies, so municipality development. Because actually, as you said, what is missing, it's the bottom-up perspective. And you'll see that all the international organizations or the players are mostly dealing with institutions, ministries, governments, civil society, which is always welcomed, but it's not that is the one implementing the policies. And then you see that what we are missing, while the services are delivered mostly to citizens by municipalities, it's municipalities. And then we try to push on the smart cities, then we try to push and promote the green agendas, while municipalities, decentralization, is not part of this framework. And that as well might be a good start for this region. On women and fourth industrial revolution, maybe I'm not exhausting my ideas, but I would say two things. First, education of young women and girls, and trying to push them to study more on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and maths. The evidence from the region is quite shocking. Mostly young women and girls out of the Western Balkans study either politics, political sciences, or international relations, which with due respect will give them a possibility to be employed mostly in the public administration or international organizations. With due respect, it's not a labor market that will satisfy the needs of all the women who would like to have a job. And given the changes, the technological revolution, it's of utmost importance to beef up the education from the earliest level and trying to push more young girls and women to study on technology and engineering and math science, which is completely lacking. Because otherwise, I'm afraid that the fourth industrial revolution will be mostly young people, which is good. Those are the coolest ones and that do understand technology. But young male people, and then people or young people without a diploma. Because that's what the market is looking for the skills now. And there is no time to wait for that. So even in France, so France is becoming the key word these days for us. Different banks in France are employing young women, but mostly young males, so young men, without a diploma to work on the digital and on the digital perspective of their organization or banks, as it's happening, for example, at Societe Generale. So, and that might be, given even the brain drain from the region, that might be an idea as well. So if you want to keep people here, we as well have to introduce them from the very early stage of education with the changes.
Thank you. I want to give another panelist an opportunity to answer this question, and then we move to another question, if you agree.
Thank you very much for being very inspiring with those words. Fully agree with you that working at the local level with the local communities is the answer to many of the challenges that we're facing in the region. And also I really liked your point in terms of how do we leverage the fourth industrial revolution, which has already started, that I highlighted. I think we need to have more initiatives and more targeted support for young women and also for youth networks. You highlighted that next year, 2020, provides a lot of opportunities as part of the Beijing Plus 25. SDG +5, UN +75, and so many other Security Council resolution +20, 1325 +20. So there is a lot of milestones, which for us are important because it's an opportunity to build allies, as you highlighted. And as part of the Beijing +25, we have launched a big campaign which is called Generations Equality. And it's very much on how to move the younger generations to create this paradigm shift along and to really shock the system in terms of all of the structural barriers and that are keeping women and men and young women behind. And as a matter of fact, along many regional consultations and platforms, we'll have one in Geneva by the end of October. Youth and young women will be one of our core constituents and core actors, organizing concrete platforms and ways to build allies. And then civil society, very big as well. We have a huge civil society forum that will be very much focusing how to build allies around the issues that are lagging behind. And then later next year, we'll have the Paris Forum, which is chaired by President Macron, and also a similar forum in Mexico by the President of Mexico, that is focusing on action coalition. And only people who will be making financial and political commitments, whether from member states, private sector, or other key actors, will actually be invited at the forum. And they will be asked to make those direct commitments there. So my point is that there is a lot of these opportunities which are important in terms of building allies, generating more commitment, and doing more for addressing some of the issues. And on the fourth industrial revolution, my other point is that there is a lot of practices. I worked in Bangladesh, as it was highlighted. You had women in the slums with very simple initiatives. We were working with Coders Trust on women who didn't even know how to turn on the computer button. You would give them a little bit of financial literacy. You would give them a computer, a bit of training, and then they were able to be connected to online portals and online global market and generate like $15 an hour, like from $0. And so you would see this direct empowerment, like in these young women. And imagine, like in our region, how many educated women you have who are eager to learn and to do more, and they would be able to make quite a good of living if we actually provide them with this knowledge, this financial literacy, this digital literacy, and these opportunities. So there is a lot more that we can do, and agree with you fully that it starts at the local level, and it starts with building allies.
Thank you so much. And before I pass on the floor to Ms. Voyachkova and then to Mr. Popov, I just want to ask whether you all think that it would be good to launch an initiative from this session to have, as a contribution to these series of forums for the 2020, an intergenerational dialogue manifestation that would be more honest and less hypocritical than they typically are in our regions, where we do not include youth, and then we dump issues on them and like, you'll figure it out, you're young. But to really try and engage, and maybe we can talk about it after the session. So Ms. Voyachkova and then Mr. Popov.
I don't want to prolong. I just wanted to give the good news, because what we forget, that in the region, who is leading the civil society in green economy and climate change? It's women. Who is organizing the industry, the private sector? Who is organizing a trade fair on green economy? It's a woman. And who is leading the media network on green economy? It's a woman. So normally I am always very balancing men and women, but unfortunately in this case, I have to say that out of my experience in this region, women were always on the forefront on climate change. but they are not listened to because they are not digging big holes and having big things.
Mr. Popov, we really, you see what PR does.
Say that
Get out of it.
I come from a country which is almost entirely run by women, including the energy sector, the pipelines, and everything. And Bulgaria keeps the top statistics about women in IT, women in research, women in finance, women in media, women in everything. It's a weird thing, I have to say. I don't know why. It's not just communism, but there are some other things, and I'm very happy with that picture. But specifically on the question of Sonia about decentralization, I mean, for me, decentralization has probably at least two aspects. One is the administrative decentralization, when you give municipality, the mayor, more power. The other is the citizens group decentralization. And I have a specific suggestion here based on recent experience in Bulgaria and a few other countries. It's the emphasis on what we call now citizen science. And 3 years ago, probably 2-3 years ago, I was involved in this development of the citizens air quality monitoring. It started in Sofia, it covered the whole country. It's German technology that kind of spread around. So at the moment, Sofia is covered with 300 air quality monitors. The mayor of Sofia, a woman, of course, tells me every morning when I wake up, the first thing that I look is not emails or text messages, but what the citizens' monitors are showing. Because if they are green, I will have a normal working day. If they are red, it will be a nightmare. So, and this was an initiative by citizens. They started buying air quality monitors, plugging them into the map, and created a movement that changed the law, shifted hundreds of millions of euros towards clean air, horrified every single politician in the country, and it continues to put incredible pressure. And it's not just about air, because when you start pushing on air, you are talking about transport policies, about housing policies, you're talking about all the legal and illegal practices in waste treatment, waste management, burning, and so on and so on. And it's not only the air area. There are many other areas like domestic violence, like forest management, and so on, that can be used. And this is all thanks to the fourth industrial revolution and the access of IT. So my suggestion is to look more closely into the citizen science movement. It can really change, create a massive change in the region.
Thank you very much, Dr. Matkovic. Would you also like to comment, or you take the next round?
Yeah, I have more of a small comment. Looking at these gender issues now, and I'm thinking, okay, there is, of course, brain and neuroplasticity around this, and how we process the information and learn stuff, and it's not gender-based. So think that men are digging holes and women are saving the planet is totally gender stereotypical, because we learn these roles. Like, I'm saving the planet because I'm a woman. Okay, Julian is also doing the same now, but it's really learned behavior. And if we push women to think about, and one of the part of this neuroplasticity is struggle. So if you struggle with a problem, your brain works. Your brain expands even if you are 50 or 40 or 60 or 80 years old. Your brain expands, it's always developing. So maybe we can do something about this as well. So
thank you so much for bringing up that point and for correcting the discourse.
Thanks.
One easily slips into really, reinterpreting stereotypes just on the other side. That wasn't an intention of this panel for sure. Thank you still. Mr. Bjeletic, I know that the Belgrade Open School also has air quality monitors. What is the experience in Serbia?
Thank you, Sanja. Yes, but we are at the beginning, I must say. It's not the scale of...
You're using the same one, looked at.
Yeah, we are, thanks to the support for the European Climate Foundation, we started this project in Serbia too, but not on that scale, I must say. And but we hope in the next period that will be, I mean, at the level which we had in Sofia. But the interest is big, and we experienced in Serbia, if you remember last winter, that really some people were outraged by the results on the not in the center of Belgrade, although it's the worst in the center, but in some suburbs of Belgrade we had demonstrations, and we also see it as a big issue, particularly outside of Belgrade, where the heating is actually based on wood, and Valjevo, Užice, and like towns of like most of Serbian towns are one of the most polluted in Europe. And actually we are competing with Skopje was the most polluted last year in Europe, and we're on the top simply because of heating systems in the winter. But citizens are interested in, and it's a great opportunity for us as civil society to actually to show that, I mean, to gain another legitimacy, that actually we are not dealing only with policies, with agendas, with SDGs, with 27 and things which majority of citizens simply don't understand, because but they feel, they see the air. Unfortunately, they can see it during the winter.
Do we have any more questions or comments from the audience? Biljana Maletin, then you.
Thank you very much, Marika Jolley from European Center for Minority Issues. Thank you very much for the inspiring discussion. I come from development background, and I've been following the development agenda in the region very closely. And one of the questions that comes into mind when we talk about green energy and renewable energy, air pollution, and where the region could potentially go, and if we look at the investment in the region in the green energy from abroad, from different countries, know that it was one of the main topics on the agenda of the Poznan summit. I'm just thinking that it is very clear that there is money to support green agenda in the Western Balkans or in the Balkans, but the question is, how do we prevent this green agenda being captured by the elites in the Western Balkan countries, and how do we prevent this money that could potentially contribute to the well-being of citizens going into the pockets of the elites, in the same way that it's happening with many other investments. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. Let's take another one before we answer.
Actually, I have same questions. How to support citizens more in our country, because we have impressions that we live alone without political elite who are corrupted, who are populist, who are without vision. So, and we have awakening of citizens in all area. People defend their rivers, their forests, their villages, really. So how to support them more? How to support civil society more and leave behind all what's going on national level? Because sometimes we have impressions then people from European administration or UN administration, they see what we live and do nothing in this part of the world. Thank you.
Okay, who wants to answer these questions?
I mean, one thing to say, because I understood that the lady is dealing with minority issues, that there is a very serious risk not only for moving investments to the elite or the middle class in many cases, but also when you develop the air quality agenda to ethnicize it. And that's a very, very serious problem. So in Bulgaria at the moment there are election campaign, and of course the more extreme nationalist parties are saying, well, it's the gypsies that poison our life because they burn wood and unregulated waste and so on and so on. First, that's not true, and second, but it's a narrative that it's very sticky, and you have to work in advance to prevent that. Otherwise, again, I would refer to the citizen science because that could really decentralize and also give a much more clearer picture of what the problem is and where exactly the problem is, and then this is a way to counter that. But it's a problem.
The question of corruption is the one that is the most crucial one, because anything that what we try to do as the UN, as civil society, as the academe, to change society for better, and when it gets stuck in a corruption spiral, then all of us are helpless. And I think there one has to look at where does the money come from, and the money comes from donors. And this is where donors have a responsibility. Because people on the ground, and we talked about municipalities, communities, they cannot do that. It has to be the ones that are financing. They have to put rules, not just administrative rules and then have an audit report, which is nice, but to really make sure that the money gets where it should get. And within the UN, we have like mega strict rules, which often slow us down because we cannot apply them because the situation on the ground does not allow for applying our rules. So often we cannot do things because of our strict rules. But then there are others who find a way to do it nevertheless. So then, you know, the strict rules don't make sense, because if only one part has strict rules and the others channel the money nevertheless. So I'm sorry to say, it is very much the responsibility of the ones who are providing the funding, that they have to understand what the local circumstances are, and they should not be just mechanical, but they should really understand where money goes. And it is about leadership, it is about positive leadership, and that is something that will only come once the money will not be easily used. And that is up to the donors to manage.
Thank you very much for the questions. I would like to give a bit of reflection on the financing at the local level, which in our experience, and in particular an issue that my organization works quite a lot, gender responsive budgeting, it has led to unpacking some of the issues that you are referring to, including revealing some of the corrupt schemes and opening more transparent, more accountable mechanisms at the local level. And we have quite a lot of experiences in the region where you have a strengthened interface between communities, civil society organization, local government, to discuss very openly and publicly about to what extent the budgets at the local level they are contributing to, of course, to gender equality, but also to local community development and local needs. So it's been a good practice, and we also have seen that through this discussion, for example, in Albania, where the budget for women was 2.4%. It immediately the next year, based on this discussion, it went to 6.8. But discussing a certain substantive thematic issue, because it's not just about women or gender, you know, you're discussing about issues that are relevant to the communities. And those issues, then discussing them openly, doing direct gender auditing, gender responsive budgeting exercises, based on our experience, it has led to a lot more openness and a lot more transparent mechanisms, and also bringing very much the local governments on board as part of that process. Of course, there is a lot more to be done. We see that only 1% of the budgets are actually being invested to gender equality across the region. And especially at the national level, so there is a lot more space. But we also have other research that I was leading in Ukraine, where we had a direct correlation between corruption and gender equality, and we saw that engaging women around the table, around the practices, it would lead to more transparent, more accountable processes, and I would be happy to share that with you. The other part that it's a big question how. We know the how, but it's challenging often, but generally it's very much based on what Sonia was referring to and what I was also referring to earlier, that it's very important to mobilize civil society. It's very important to mobilize networks, and they work across borders. And it's very important to identify champions and leaders. And these are some of the ways that we can address many of the challenges and turn a lot of the challenges, including the climate challenges, into economic opportunities or other opportunities for women and men in the region.
We have only just started and it's time to end, I'm afraid. Thank you very much for this opportunity, the Belgrade Security Forum and Sonja Licht in particular. And we hope to meet again next in the hallways to continue our discussion and keep on planning how we will move next, because this isn't a group that will just go back to normal ever. Thank you so much.